weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
This Saturday, how to invest in the next big trend in tech.
Generative AI will be impacting positively to every other potential industry that you can ever think of.
Managing your home loan as interest rates rise.
The biggest fear is how high can it go?
Plus how to maximize your travel budget despite rising costs. Money Mind, Saturday at 10:30 p.m.
We serve it. We love it. We thought bak kut teh was ours. But then, Malaysia claimed it and even said they named it.
bak kut teh 的名字就是我爷爷的名字演变成来。
Has Singapore been slurping up a Malaysian invention?
Wait. Singapore have a parallel history.
Food Fight. Sunday on CNA.
I think as humans, we're designed to explore.
The quest for space inspires man to innovate.
Space make impossible thing possible.
Food technologies built for space help reboot agriculture on Earth.
These are the steps we're taking towards changing the way we are able to feed people on Earth.
Unlocking new frontiers in food. Watch Space Farmers on demand at cna.asia.
This is Asia Now.
Hello, it is 12 p.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 11 o'clock in Jakarta and 9:30 in New Delhi. I'm Chan Yu Im. Your top stories. Tensions spike in the Middle East. Israel's army targets sites in Lebanon and Gaza in response to rocket attacks allegedly initiated by Hamas. The tit-for-tat strikes triggered by police raids at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. China imposes further sanctions on Taiwan's de facto ambassador to the U.S. after President Tsai Ing-wen meets House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. And the world's largest memory chip maker, Samsung Electronics, says it will cut production after projecting its lowest profit since the global financial crisis. Fears of an escalation mounting in the Middle East after Israel launched strikes against Lebanon and Gaza. Several missiles reportedly fired from Lebanon earlier struck buildings in northern Israel. Israel accusing Palestinian militant group Hamas of being responsible, while Hamas claims it has no information about who fired the missiles. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has pledged to retaliate. Israeli forces earlier launched several airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, targeting Hamas tunnels and weapons manufacturing sites. Hamas has been accused of firing 34 rockets from southern Lebanon into Israel. The group has meanwhile condemned Israel's strikes in Lebanon. Tensions are high after Israeli police raided and clashed with Palestinian worshippers in Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque twice in the past 2 days. Israel refers to the mosque as the Temple Mount. Mr. Netanyahu has urged calm while vowing to strike back after the rocket attacks and also promising strong action against those he describes as extremists. He says he will make the attackers pay the price for their acts of aggression. Mr. Netanyahu is said to have discussed the worsening situation with his security cabinet. The UN, meanwhile, has condemned the rocket attack on Israel and called for restraint.
We urge all actors to exercise maximum restraint. The UN interim force in Lebanon remains in contact with authorities on both sides of the blue line, and we urge the parties to liaise with our peacekeepers and avoid any unilateral action that could further escalate the situation.
Israel says most of the rockets fired from Lebanon were intercepted, but 6 managed to hit its territory. The rockets caused some light damage to several buildings and left 2 people with minor injuries. Officials say yesterday's attack is the largest salvo of rockets fired from the Lebanese territory since its war against Hezbollah in 2006. China has slapped further sanctions on Taiwan's representative to the U.S. The move comes after President Tsai Ing-wen's meeting with U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy yesterday. The first sanctions on Xiao P. Kim prohibit her and her family members from entering the mainland and the territories of Hong Kong and Macau. Investors and firms related to Ms. Xiao are also not allowed to do business with mainland organizations. Ms. Xiao was first targeted by China last August as part of Beijing's response to then U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island. China has previously branded Ms. Xiao as part of a group of, quote, independence diehards. China's foreign ministry also took aim at U.S.-based institutions, the Reagan Library and the Hudson Institute. Beijing says the two bodies provided platforms and facilities for, quote, separatist activities by Ms. Tsai. The Taiwanese leader had visited both places during her trip. Separately, a new delegation of American officials led by the House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul landed in Taiwan yesterday. And they are likely to meet President Tsai Ing-wen tomorrow and discuss speeding up weapons deliveries to the island. Mr. McCaul says he will not be deterred by Beijing's opposition to growing relations between Washington and Taipei.
Well, we're not going to let this intimidation, get to us. We all received sort of threatening texts. There was talk about a Chinese escort in the air, but that's just really intimidation, saber rattling. I think the meetings we're going to have here are going to be very important in terms of, the next leadership. Meet with President Tsai, talk about weapon systems that I sign off on going into Taiwan to harden Taiwan, and are they prepared? Do we have enough deterrence to stop, aggression coming from Communist China?
China earlier responded to Mr. McCarthy's meeting with President Tsai by sending warships near Taiwan's coast. This includes the Shandong aircraft carrier, which entered the Pacific Ocean for the first time. Beijing also deployed a large maritime patrol group to the central and northern parts of the Taiwan Strait.
他曾经有海航20多次，但第一次他出南海，然后在这个位置，我们是当然好像也是训练的一环，我把它判定为这样，但是因为这个时机比较敏感，所以他到这来，他是有他的用意，我们军方也在做研判。
China's foreign ministry says Washington has made a serious mistake by promoting official exchanges with Taipei. Beijing also reiterated its accusation that Taiwan's ruling DPP party is relying on the U.S. to seek independence. Meantime, former Taiwan President Ma Ying-jeou from the opposition KMT has made a historic trip to China. With months to go in the lead-up to Taiwan's presidential election in January, Victoria Jen explores the ramifications as politicking heats up.
There's widespread speculation that the simultaneous trips by the two leaders are part of the political jogging ahead of the presidential election. Some local media claim that President Tsai's meeting with Mr. McCarthy will be a political gain for both the ruling DPP and Taiwan. It will help pave the way for deeper collaboration between both sides, particularly with the signing of the U.S.-Taiwan bilateral trade agreement reportedly close to completion. The DPP has also been eyeing closer economic cooperation with other Western nations in face of economic pressure from Beijing. It's widely seen as Ms. Tsai consolidating her legacy before stepping down next year as she reached the term limit for the presidency.
It is no secret that today, the peace that we have maintained and the democracy which have worked hard to build are facing unprecedented challenges. We once again find ourselves in a world where democracy is under threat, and the urgency of keeping the beacon of freedom shining cannot be understated.
She will be keen to make a last push to ensure the DPP stays in power after the ruling party suffered a landslide defeat to the opposition KMT at the local election late last year. Meanwhile, former Taiwan President Ma Ying-jeou from the KMT is doing quite the opposite. During his visit to China, he has constantly emphasized that China and Taiwan share the same history and culture and that both sides should seek peace and not war. He stressed the importance of the 1992 consensus, which is the cornerstone of cross-strait relations, and also the guiding principle of the KMT's engagement with the mainland. Public opinion on Mr. Ma's trip, however, remains divided. Some see his visit as an effort to reduce tensions across the strait and push forward with the KMT's political agenda when he met with China-Taiwan's Affairs Office Chief Song Tao. Others criticize his trip as kowtowing to Beijing and undermining Taiwan's sovereignty. This especially when China is ramping up military pressure and continues with its solid diplomacy by establishing diplomatic ties with Taiwan's longtime Central American ally, Honduras. With the U.S.-China rivalry set to continue, Taiwan will no doubt be caught in the crossfire as the island's presidential race heats up. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says China is willing to engage with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Russia's grinding war in the country. She held talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping and France's President Emmanuel Macron in Beijing. Ms. von der Leyen said President Xi's comments on the matter were positive. The EU and France at the same time also made clear that China must not support Russia's invasion.
As I reported, raised the point of arms deliveries. And I want to be very clear on that one, that arming the aggressor is a clear violation of international law. It's the aggressor, and he should never be armed. And this would indeed significantly harm the relationship between the European Union and China.
Mr. Xi told the EU leaders that a call with President Zelensky could happen when the conditions and timing are right. Mr. Zelensky has repeatedly asked to meet with Mr. Xi following his visit to Moscow last month. The Chinese leader has emphasized that he has peace and stability in mind.
中欧应当坚持对话和合作，维护世界和平稳定，促进共同的发展繁荣。 推动人类文明进步，携手应对全球性挑战。
Both China and France have called for Russia-Ukraine peace talks to be held as soon as possible. Mr. Macron urged President Xi to, quote, talk sense into Moscow.
Et je sais pouvoir compter sur vous, au titre d'ailleurs des deux principes que je viens d'évoquer, pour ramener la Russie à la raison et tout le monde à la table des négociations. Et nous y reviendrons dans le détail, mais nous avons besoin de retrouver une paix durable, c'est-à-dire une paix qui respecte les frontières internationalement reconnues et qui évite toute forme d'escalade. Et je crois que c'est aussi une question importante pour la Chine autant qu'elle l'est pour la France et pour l'Europe.
Olivia Xiong tells us about President Xi Jinping's response to Mr. Macron's appeal.
We know that even prior to this visit, Mr. Macron had placed the Ukraine war very high on his agenda, keen for China to use its influence over Russia to reign in Moscow. But we saw that Mr. Xi, in his opening remarks of that meeting, did not mention Ukraine. Also, he had this to say when both leaders met the media.
关于乌克兰危机，中方坚持劝和促谈，政治解决。 中方愿同法方一道，呼吁国际社会保持理性克制，避免采取使危机进一步恶化甚至失控的行动。
Now, we know that China has adopted what is called a neutral position in this Ukraine war, and it's noteworthy in that Mr. Xi's comments to the media, he adopted very vague language, not mentioning Russia or Ukraine or other countries, even as he said that there was a need to ensure civilians would be protected and that nuclear weapons are not used, also stopping short of condemning Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, as has been China's position in this past year. It's a contrast to Mr. Macron's statement that followed, in which he specifically said, for example, that Russia was violating humanitarian law in Ukraine. Also, it was telling that the French leader did say that while he agrees with a number of the principles that he had discussed with the Chinese side, that he hoped that in the very near future that there would be a much more demanding conversation between the two sides and with Russia, he said, to remind Moscow of these principles, that it's a matter of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, perhaps pointing and signaling that Mr. Macron may have not solicited the kind of response or commitment that he was hoping for from the Chinese leader.
Earlier on CNA 938, they spoke to Carissa Nietzsche, Associate Fellow at the Transatlantic Security Program and Center for a New American Security. She explained why she does not think Beijing can bring Moscow to the negotiating table.
I think that, while Macron is calling on Xi Jinping to bring Russia to its senses, just a few weeks ago, the United States and Europe were both concerned that China was arming Russia in its war in Ukraine. So I do think that that is certainly one concern. This is something that was echoed throughout the dialogue today, that that is a red line for Europe and for the United States if we start to see China arming Moscow. Another element here is that any kind of negotiated settlement or peace settlement would have to be done and underpinned by upholding sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And I think that it's a very challenging ask to ask that of President Xi Jinping, particularly since we are seeing China's own actions in its neighborhood that are hinting at a potential revision of the international order. So I think that this is certainly a challenging ask for the West to ask of Xi Jinping, and I remain skeptical that we will see any kind of negotiated peace settlement anytime soon, and that we'll see Beijing playing a leading role in that.
Up next is your Asia Business Update. China asks Australia to treat all firms fairly after the country moves to ban TikTok on government devices. Plus, Tesla dealing with privacy concerns after car camera recordings were reportedly shared among employees.
Don't miss the opening of the second session of Singapore's 14th Parliament. Live on Monday on CNA.
Farm life is unpredictable.
The house burnt down on the 19th of December.
But just by listening to nature,
what a beauty. My first ever beehive.
We can reimagine the way we grow our food.
You can imagine this place 10 years from now. It's just going to be amazing. Lots of fruits, lots of food.
I'm going back to my roots.
You are your own scientist. Over time, you need to observe and see what works for you.
And rethinking the role of an urban farmer in Growing Wild tonight on CNA.
Cryptocurrency prices crash, DeFi companies blow up, NFT scam, GameFi hack, fraud, and the metaverse land bust. I've always wondered, is there something more behind the headlines? Web 1 and 2 have already changed how we live, work, and play. What happens when the next evolution is powered by a host of new values and technologies?
Web 3 is one of the most important inventions for Asian artists.
How can we rescue Taiwan IT industry? I cannot see any solution than Web 3.
Thailand missed out on the Web 2 boat totally.
Now we are the fastest move in action.
I don't think we know what the next trillion-dollar businesses will be, but they are absolutely coming.
Join me as I learn from builders in Asia, building real use cases in real life.
Next time on Japan Hour.
ここでのミッションは3つの将棋のシルエットを見つけて写真に収めろ。
はい、行きましょう。だいたい1キロほどございます。
1キロ。あれじゃない。
あれやん。
これ。
そこ。
これのミッションがカシメ梅を使った商品の中から人気3位を。おいしい。おいしい。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. And Zip Air. Summer fares now available with daily flights.
Male infertility on the rise.
More men are less shy about coming forward to get tested.
A telehealth service with discretion.
We tackle men's health conditions such as erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, hair loss, and mental health.
And mirrors in the gym. Friend or foe.
The mirror can be great motivation when you look right into it, but it's also a double-edged sword.
On the Pulse, Saturday on CNA.
Welcome back. In business news, Samsung Electronics shares up more than 4%. Let's have a look, nearly 4.2% that is, after the firm announced it was cutting chip production to ride out the market downturn. Global memory chip prices have fallen more than anticipated recently, and analysts are expecting it to slide further in the coming months. A South Korean electronics giant is forecasting its slimmest profit since the global financial crisis, a more than 95% on-year plunge in March quarter profit due to a sharp slowdown in tech demand. Samsung's estimates reflect a worsening chip glut as buyers slow their purchases. Full results are due later this month. Meanwhile, South Korean shares are on track for their fourth straight weekly gain, the Kospi jumping more than 1%, led by heavyweight chip makers. SK Hynix is up close to 6% earlier, now about up 5.6%. And the KLCI, let's have a look, down just slightly, TAIEX trading up about 0.1%. Elsewhere in the region, there is thin volume trade today. Many markets are closed for Good Friday. These include Singapore, Indonesia, Australia, and New Zealand. Let's have a look at Japan. Tokyo shares there on the rise. The Nikkei up just a touch, and the Japanese yen strengthening just slightly against the US dollar. Investors also keeping their focus on US jobs data out later today for clues into the Fed's next steps as it battles inflation. Rising prices, meanwhile, have taken a bit of a bite out of Japanese workers' pay packets. Real wages there fell in February for the 11th straight month on year, but the rate of decrease for the inflation-adjusted gauge slowed to 2.6%, down from the more than 4% fall in January. Meantime, mainland Chinese equities are inching higher after a flat open, with China's small-cap growth shares leading gains in onshore markets after shares of American big tech firms advanced overnight. Shanghai Composite is up about 0.3%, Shenzhen Composite up about 0.8%. And the yuan is just weakening against the dollar. China's central bank made its biggest weekly cash withdrawal in 3 months this week as liquidity tensions eased. Hong Kong, of course, closed for a public holiday. Our Standard Chartered Bank's Rajat Bhattacharya explains why he is upbeat about China's growth prospects and the positive spillover into Asia.
We see Asia as a bright spot in the global landscape. We prefer bonds over equities, and we prefer Asian bonds. So Asia dollar bonds is our primary preference across our asset allocations. Why? Because Asia is going to be relatively better off. You talked about recession risk in the US. Asia, and particularly China, is recovering. So China, Asia is on the opposite end of that global economic spectrum. So Asian dollar bonds, the Asian dollar corporate bonds, are likely to outperform the rest. So the domestic services sector growth is picking up in China, and that means that the domestic consumers coming back. You also see some of that flow through into Singapore, for instance. You've seen how the tourist levels are back to pre-pandemic levels in Singapore. Export sector is a headwind. The domestic recovery story in China and that going through to Asia is a tailwind for the region.
It is kiss and makeup for two Chinese tech darlings. TikTok's counterpart in China, Douyin, has joined hands with Tencent to explore joint cooperation, which will boost the platform's short and long videos. The move marks improving ties as the two former rivals put earlier legal battles and hostile verbal exchanges behind them. According to Douyin's owner, ByteDance, it's now authorized to use Tencent video content. The company also says users of platforms in the Douyin group will be able to create short videos using the content in long videos on Tencent platforms. While TikTok's China counterpart Douyin is teaming up with Tencent, Beijing is expressing displeasure over Canberra's stance on TikTok. China's Commerce Ministry says treating TikTok differently from other social media platforms is not conducive to maintaining Australia's national security. It urges Canberra to treat all firms fairly and create a favourable environment for bilateral economic and trade cooperation. Beijing's reaction comes after the Australian government announced on Tuesday that it would remove TikTok from all federal government-owned devices due to security issues. That's in line with the decision of several other countries in barring the Chinese-owned video app. Now, have you ever had that feeling that you're being watched? Well, for Tesla owners in the US, the hunch might prove to be justified. A Reuters special report has found that some workers in the world's largest EV maker had shared sensitive recordings taken from the car's built-in cameras. Now, this is according to interviews with 9 former Tesla employees.
Tesla assures its millions of customers that their privacy is enormously important, noting on its website that the built-in cameras that assist with driving are designed to, quote, protect your privacy. But images shared over a private internal messaging system from 2019 to 2022 included sometimes embarrassing situations, such as a man approaching a vehicle naked, according to one former employee. That ex-employee added, quote, I'm bothered by it because the people who buy the car, I don't think they know that their privacy is like not respected. We could see them doing laundry and really intimate things. We could see their kids. Crashes and road rage incidents were also viewed, including one of a Tesla hitting a child riding a bike, according to an ex-employee. One former staffer saw nothing wrong with sharing the images, but said a function that allowed the company to view the location of recordings on Google Maps was a, quote, massive invasion of privacy, one that could potentially reveal where a Tesla owner lived. Reuters wasn't able to obtain any of the shared videos or images, which ex-employees said they had not kept. Reuters also wasn't able to determine if the practice of sharing recordings, which occurred within some parts of Tesla as recently as last year, continues today, or how widespread it was. Some former employees contacted said the only sharing they observed was for legitimate work purposes, such as seeking assistance from colleagues or supervisors. To develop self-driving car technology, Tesla collects a vast trove of data from its global fleet of several million vehicles. The company requires car owners to grant permission on the car's touch screens before Tesla collects their vehicle's data. In its customer privacy notice, Tesla explains that the data may include short video clips or images, but isn't linked to a customer's account or vehicle identification number and, quote, does not identify you personally. Tesla did not respond to detailed questions sent to the company for the Reuters report.
All ahead on Asia now, Japanese authorities find what may be parts of a military helicopter that went missing off of Okinawa's coast yesterday. Plus, a new report says North Korea stole a record sum of cryptocurrency last year. I'll have more on that after the break.
Yeah.